Okay, well, maybe we can start. So greetings and welcome to the second year of Renaissance Lives, a podcast series of conversation with the authors of book in the Reaction Books Renaissance Lives series with a member of the Warburg Institute. As you remember from last year, each session lasts about 1 hour, and it's followed by a session of a question and answer where you, the audience, have the opportunity to send your questions to the panel. In a nutshell, the idea of the series is to discuss the way in which some individuals have received, transmitted, modified, challenged, or disrupted the lives of traditions, of systems of beliefs, ideas, and image, and eventually how these individuals have affected our perception and our understanding of the world. Last year, we began with Petrarch, one of the founders of the Renaissance, at least in the field of letters and language. And this year we begin with Donatello, 1386-1466, to give you his date, who, as you can see in this overview, has received and transformed antique and medieval tradition and became what we might call kind of multimedia founder of the Renaissance. Now, to talk about Donatello today, I am joined by, let me go back one image. Whoops. Okay, I'll take care of this in a second. To talk about Donatello today, I am joined by Victor Coonin, who is currently professor of art history at Rhodes College, and this year is also the Dorothy Kaiser Hohenberg Chair of Excellence at the University of Memphis. He is the author of Donatello and the Dawn of Renaissance Art, and he has also extensively written on the Italian Renaissance, including a monograph on Michelangelo's David. It is equally a pleasure and a privilege to welcome his interlocutor, Fabio, who from this term onwards is Associate Fellow at the Warburg Institute after a career that started, I think, in Cambridge, went to Glasgow and Stanford. He is the author of various articles and particularly groundbreaking work. His recent book is quite remarkable, and I would recommend it to anyone, especially in the Christmas period, Painting in Stone, Architecture and the Poetics of Marble, from Antiquity to the Age of Enlightenment, Yale 2020. But without further ado, Fabio, maybe you'd like to ask the first question while I move to the cover of the book.
Yes, thank you. So this is also a book that one can recommend in the Christmas period. And hello, Victor. I wonder first if we could begin by you telling us why you've divided the book up in the way you have, what the challenges are of writing a short book on such a vast subject is, and especially also writing for the general public.
Yes, thank you. And let me give my thanks to François and Fabio and the Warburg Institute and of course, Reaction Books as well for this opportunity. In writing the book, I sort of had the help of all of the above as well in thinking about it. And it did change from my initial thinking about the book to what it became. And, you know, here we find these challenges between things that are written as academic articles or things that might be written as catalog entries or things that might be written as books for the general public. And keeping in mind audience is a tricky thing. So one wants the content to remain the same. I want to say about Donatello the things that I want to say about Donatello, but the delivery mechanism was what I needed to figure out. And you know, here we have academic articles that often follow a certain logical sequence, but it might not have much of a narrative arc. And I thought that for the general public, the book really did need a narrative arc of some sort. Mm-hmm. And while initially I thought maybe I would treat Donatello thematically rather than chronologically, that soon became kind of untenable. And so what emerged without really trying to force it was this sense that Donatello's life and career seemed to me to start to really fall into this pattern of what's often called the hero's journey. And there's a certain natural narrative arc that goes along with that. And I thought that for both a scholarly audience as well as a general audience, that would work. And I didn't want to impose anything on Donatello, and I didn't want to force anything. But generally speaking, I found these general patterns. First a call to adventure, as they say, and it's right there. Usually, the call to adventure happens with the death of a parent or some disruption. And in Donatello's case, our first documents are from just after his father dies. Donatello is actually in Pistoia. He gets in trouble for hitting another young man with a stick, and we find Donatello with Brunelleschi in Pistoia, and the beginning of this incredible adventure that then takes him back to Florence, and then presumably from Florence to Rome. And in the sequence of the hero's journey, it's where one discovers one's powers, and I think that that's what Donatello is starting to do. And then as we get into the second chapter, usually our hero, so to speak, starts to gain some success and learn an awful lot, usually with the help of powerful assistance, whether that's divine intervention or something else. But I think that with Donatello, we actually have that in the form of his incredible collaborations with Brunelleschi, with Michelozzo, with the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici, the most powerful man in Florence. So we see this wonderful development take place, and then inevitably there has to be, what's kind of leading up in chapter 3 is the trials, the ordeals that our hero has to overcome, and certainly that happens with Donatello. We have the Prato Pulpit, which goes on for many years and never really is satisfactorily finished, and we have the old sacristy, which in some sources, it's the cause of a falling out between Donatello and Brunelleschi, and it's in the midst of that Donatello leaves Florence. And we can talk about that later, what his reasons might be for leaving Florence. But to sort of end the story, there has to be a period of exile, right? Whether you want to call it exile or not with Donatello, I don't want to push that. But he goes to Padua for 10 years. He leaves Florence. And it's in this period then where the hero goes through some sort of a personal growth, discovers new abilities, personal reflection, et cetera. And I really do think that happens with Donatello. And then finally, chapter 5, the final chapter in the hero's journey is the homecoming. And the homecoming is never easy. It's never smooth. You can think about Odysseus when he comes home and all of a sudden has to fight the suitors. With Donatello too, I think that there's a bit of a fight that he goes through. He's in poor health. He goes to Siena for a while to live and die, he says, and then of course comes back to Florence, and I think is rightly celebrated as a hero. And what I tell my students sometimes is, no good popular movie can end without a dance party. And with Donatello, in effect, I think the dance party is that he ends up being buried in San Lorenzo in the crypt right next to Cosimo de' Medici, an honor that really is incomparable. And we might think of these exhibitions that are going on these days as dance parties of sorts, but in effect, by the time Donatello dies, he is the celebrated artist of his day, and I think today we can look at him as having had this narrative arc of the hero's journey. So again, I didn't want to push it too far, but that's what more or less led to that division of the book.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can go to slide 2 for a second. So thank you. So yeah, so it's an epic. And the output is vast and various. There's, of course, been a very big exhibition in Florence. It's now in Berlin, and soon, I think from February or March, it will be at the V&A in London, and I really hope you're going to take me around with you. the London iteration. But your book was written before all of them. So having seen at least the Florence show, what effect did it have on your thoughts about the artist? What changes would you make if you had to write this book again or revise it?
Yes, that's something that I've thought about a lot, especially through publications that have appeared after my book, and really most remarkably because of these exhibitions. While we have this slide here, though, I just want to read a couple of sentences from my book. The slide disappeared, but if we can go to number 2 once more, it bears repeating just how prolific Donatello was and how profound was his effect on the arts of Florence. And so I write, during the Renaissance, his sculptures at one time or another graced the cathedral, its bell tower and baptistry, the main market, the civic palace or Palazzo Vecchio, the principal city square, the Piazza della Signoria, the important grain market of Or San Michele, various individual churches, including San Lorenzo and Santa Croce, and many private palaces, including those of the Medici and Martelli families. No other artist, I argue, can boast such a prolific output in Florence. Not Leonardo da Vinci, not Botticelli, Michelangelo, or Raphael. In addition, Donatello produced significant works for Venice, Padua, and Siena, while many other cities vied for his services, including patrons from Pisa, Naples, Rome, Ferrara, and Mantua. And Pomponio Garrico goes on to say that there were more works by Donatello than by all his notable contemporaries combined. And, you know, while that's certainly an exaggeration, it must have seemed that way, that everywhere you looked in Florence, there was Donatello. If you were walking down the streets, you didn't have to open a door. You could see his works on the bell tower cathedral or San Michele. If you did open doors, then you'd see further works by Donatello in churches and palaces, etc. So he was incredibly prolific. But one of the other remarkable things about Donatello is that he never really repeats himself. So everything is this idiosyncratic, individualized work. And he's always pushing. He's always seeking new materials. There again, you have works in bronze, in marble, in terracotta. You know, the list goes on and on and on. If you can name the material, he probably used it in some form or another. And I think that we are often prone to looking at individual works as we want to see them or discuss them, and the exhibition is a wonderful opportunity to just bring together. There's terracotta, there's bronze, there's marble. Every room has this array of techniques and themes and materials, which is really pretty astounding.
And the exhibition brought Florence and Padua and Siena, didn't it, into a series of rooms, and you could compare things in a way you never could have done in the past. So I'm sort of curious about how you reacted to that.
Yeah, there were quite a few of what I'll call kind of revelations. If you want to go to the next slide, actually, this is fine. In the upper right corner, we have Donatello's Marble David and the two crucifixes, one by Brunelleschi and one by Donatello. And if you want to go for just a second to, I think it's the third or fourth slide in the PowerPoint, what that Marble David looks like in the Bargello, and then we can go to a couple of slides that I took. This is probably the single sculpture that changed the most for me in the exhibition. I had seen it many times, of course, in the Bargello, and honestly never particularly liked this figure. I always found it to be a little bit awkward. But if you go to the next slide, and what you have here are two photographs that I took, one from more or less straight on, but the other one from below, it transformed before me somehow in the lighting, in the ability to give it a new consideration. And it's probably the one single sculpture in the book that I would change my discussion on. There's a long history coming through Jansen and Popenessy and other great scholars arguing over documents that have to do with Donatello's work for the cathedral, and especially a statue of David. So he begins in 1408, not to get too complicated, there are documents from 1412, and then there are documents from 1416 when Donatello modifies the figure, when it's effectively confiscated by the government and put up in the Palazzo Vecchio. And so the question had always been, are we talking about multiple statues or just one? And I more or less followed Pope Hennessy's reasoning on this, where he even sort of advocates for another statue that's often called the Pathetic Prophet. But after seeing this exhibit, and especially after going to see the Pathetic Prophet, which I no longer think is by Donatello at all whatsoever, and especially giving credit where it's due, a really remarkable article that came out just after the book had gone to press. It's a 4-author article, but Cagliotti, Rowley, Galli, and Cavazzini. I need to thank them for this article, which really makes sense of the documentation here. And to make a long story short, it's one statue that they're talking about in these documents, and this is it. And this statue really grew in my mind, looking at it from below compared to seeing it in that photo on the left. It looks so much more proud and vigorous and brave and forceful. The light, the way that it hits the statue in the exhibit, I think is just remarkable. You can go to the next slide and see some of the details with the light shimmering through on the left. Some of the details that Donatello introduces with Goliath's hair that's falling over the base, and the toes of David that are dipping over the base there. In the next slide, if you want to go, there are a few other details. We don't have to look at all of them, but still the care and attention that Donatello takes to borders and to what would seem to be incidental details. These are all kind of hallmarks of Donatello. And again, I think that this would be the one work that I wish I had a do-over. I'd like to write about again. I still think that the early career of Donatello is a bit problematic, but it's being sorted out better and better. And the catalog does a very nice job. There's a wonderful essay by Francesco Cagliotti, which is this distillation of many years of thinking about the statue, which I find very good. It's extremely dense, and I've had to read certain paragraphs 3, 4, 5 times to really get his sense of what he's trying to express. But I think that the early work of Donatello is coming into greater focus, including, if you wanted to stop here, the differences between that figure on the left, which I think most scholars have a consensus it's by Donatello, and the one next to it is not. But that figure that you're looking at on the right, that image of Christ, which is a bit awkward, and is quite a beautiful figure, but I do think now is in fact consistent with other things that Donatello is doing in this early phase of his career. And so I'm much more prone to accept this now as helping to advance our understanding of Donatello in this early phase of his career.
Okay, let's move on. I think we go to the next slide, perhaps. Right, so you discuss these at comparative length in your book. Maybe you could just rehearse some of those thoughts and add any others if they've occurred to you since the show. And before you answer, I should just say, because I know it will come up in the next image, but I'll mention it now, that the Donatello Christ has movable arms. And so I think that'd be an interesting, which I hadn't really noticed, to tell you the truth, until I read that passage. And I think that's worth maybe a comment or two as well.
Yes. So there's a couple of ways to talk about these images and what's happening here. And one of the things that I try to express in the book in various parts, including with this comparison of these crucifixes, is the following. It's very easy, especially for the general public to somehow view artists as illustrating, ideas or thoughts that are percolating in the society. I suppose, it's sort of zeitgeist that we have, and sometimes that's true, but I don't think that that's true in the case of Donatello. I think when we use the term the Renaissance and think about the Renaissance, Donatello is actually helping to create the Renaissance. Without Donatello, I don't think that the Renaissance becomes what it became. There's no telling what it would have become, but it certainly doesn't become this. And so these crucifixes give us a good chance to see Brunelleschi and Donatello in a dialogue, in an artistic dialogue, I think really debating with each other, what are we doing? What are we doing in terms of investigating classical antiquity? What are we doing in terms of looking at real and actual people? What are we doing in terms of trying to make sense of biblical stories, classical stories, et cetera, in what for them would have been the 15th century, right? And what are we doing to create a new type of art? And I think here we have an example where Brunelleschi, in effect, kind of scolds Donatello, right? If Vasari's story is accurate, he's accusing Donatello of making a peasant rather than a heroic Christ. And in effect, Donatello says, yeah, if it's so easy to do, why don't you go and do it? And so Brunelleschi goes and does it, and causes Donatello literally to lose his lunch, right? As he drops the eggs and whatever else they had gathered at the market upon the site of Brunelleschi's crucifix. So it's worth sort of looking into these, because I love Donatello's figure, but I do think that Brunelleschi has a point here, that what we're striving for is this kind of combination of realism as well as the heroism, and making Christ look like a certain image or vision of Christ means that we need to rethink the nature of these crucifixion images. That inevitably moves away from the medieval image with the focus on the pain and suffering and that sort of Ondagsbild, and towards something that is using this classical past and using some of the stylistic contributions that they're admiring, but now, of course, making a Christian figure, and the most important Christian figure. And so when we look at those two crucifixes, I think we really see a lesson in what is the Renaissance, and how is the Renaissance blooming and blossoming. And of course, the public is seeing this. They're watching this play out, and that has a tremendous effect. So artists here, I think, are leaders in this cultural transformation, along with political leaders, along with economic leaders, along with preachers and spiritual leaders. But artists cannot be discounted here. I think that they're among the driving forces, and not in any way just sort of illustrating what other people are talking about. You also asked about this the movable arms, which I think is relatively recent that we understand this. So those arms could pivot, which implies, of course, that the figure was not static and always just hanging in one place, but could be taken off of whatever its original mount was. That the arms could be lowered and then raised again, and so that the work of art would have been carried in processions. Probably would have been a part of some sort of a reenactment of a deposition, perhaps, or raising of the cross. And when we consider that, it makes for a much more dynamic figure. But it also, I think, gives us some insights into Donatello, because constantly Donatello is challenging this notion that a sculpture is just a mass to look at. Right? I think he's constantly telling us, no, it's something to be experienced. It's something that is interactive. I think Donatello was way ahead of the game in terms of virtual reality and alternate realities, and and trying to create spaces that would not just fool the eye in a simple sense, but to create a new experience for the viewer. And he's probably not the first to do pivoting arms on a sculpture, but he certainly is trying to make a character as realistic and lifelike as he can, and then realizing it's more than that, right? Thank you, Brunelleschi. It's also about this content that the statue has.
Yeah, I mean, I presume that it's part of the sort of fever pitch of the religious year, and it belongs to the Easter liturgy, and the figure is deposed from the cross on Good Friday, is then put in an Easter sepulchre in the church after being processed as well, because I mean that seems to be inherent in the fact you take it down and the arms would flop. Christ will actually get off the cross, and then he'll be prone, on a bier carried around. I presume. Shall we move on? Yes. So this is Siena. We're in Siena, and why is this slide in here, Victor? This is another of the surprises. Another of the surprises of the exhibition.
Well, again, I wasn't sure exactly what the audience would be here, and some scholars would know exactly where some of these works come from, but others might not. So this is a really remarkable creation of the 15th century. Several artists take part, and what we have is this baptistry font with the basin and with the superstructure that rises out of it, and Donatello, along with other artists, made creations for this. But you can see here how you would normally visit it, and it's very difficult to get up close. The lighting is not ideal, and the figures have been in great need of conservation. So now, if you want to go to the next slide, this is just a press photo, but I think it's rather dramatic, showing the figure in the process of transformation. And if you want to go to the next slide again, you see what the figures on the left have looked like all these years, relatively dark, almost blackened, and not really showing their great gilding. And here you have hope and faith, hope which was restored for the Florence exhibition. My understanding is faith is in the process of further restoration. But it's remarkable. One of many revelations in the exhibit was, seeing old works that all of a sudden looked like new works, and this was one of them, because we've never seen it like this. And what you have then is a real excitement of the surface, of the glistening qualities of the gold, and the way that plays into the whole spiritual nature of the figures. Again, with Donatello, details matter, and I think that the fact that these were supposed to be gilded and sparkling representations of these personifications of hope and faith are really now things that we can relive as these special moments.
Well, I think this probably has implications as well for the reception of the works and the historiography, because I remember when I was a child, my father had one of those big format Phaidon books, cloth-bound books with black and white plates in them, and which was an influence on me when I was learning to draw in charcoal. And that's the way those sculptures were transmitted to people who couldn't come and see them, whether they were artists or the public, a bit like the Sistine Chapel, which everybody used to think was a sort of symphony in brown and green. So, I mean, I haven't seen the show yet, so I'm looking forward to having my eyes open wide to new vision, materiality, and facture and technique, and so on, and perceiving probably new relationships with other arts, especially painting, which is, it's highlighted here. Again, there's another instance of cleaning and the benefits of cleaning, and also seeing things out of context. So is there something you'd like to dwell on here?
Sure. There were 2 or 3 moments in the show where I just felt like my jaw was dropping, that the brilliance of Donatello was really showing through, and this was one of them. So I have 2 shots here. The one on the left is a photograph that I took just to sort of take a new photo of it, but the one on the right might show the details a little bit better. And what I found remarkable here is the way that Donatello is creating a certain type of art that I really do think is meant to somehow transport the viewer into a place that is other than our normal place. Without being redundant, I think that the modern equivalent to that is putting on virtual reality glasses and walking through the metaverse or something like that. But there's always something so artificial about that. Whereas this in some ways is even more effective. And so he's using everything at his disposal. He's using perspective, he's using architecture, he's using arts that he's learned from painting, from sculpture. He's talking about narrative here. But if we zero in on the center of the work, sort of if you wanted to draw diagonals, what do you get? You get this very weird kind of triangular void in the brickwork. If you can go down just a tiny bit, we can see that void a little bit better. And you sort of ask yourself, what's that all about, right? Why that little detail? There's this indentation in the bricks just to the left of that figure too. Those are moments to me that when I talk with my artist friends and they zero in on paintings or sculptures that they admire by other artists, it's often these quirky moments, these idiosyncratic moments that help to draw the viewer in, because it is a bit of a puzzle. I don't think to be solved. I think to be marveled at. And once you get your eye sort of into that triangle a little bit, you realize that you're looking down at the table and down onto the floor, but you're looking up into some of those arches and vaults that you see in the background. So he wants to pull you in. Donatello doesn't want you to have this feeling of distance, right? This dispassionate sort of view. I think he wants to pull your face right into that relief, for you to be looking at these quirky little moments, for you to look down at the table, to push your eye over towards Herod, who's looking back in horror as the head of Saint John the Baptist is literally being delivered to him on a platter. He wants you then to just a remarkable expression. You look on the right and you have other figures that are reacting in a multitude of ways. You want to try to figure out what's happening in that middle ground, where you have a musician who maybe is trying to evoke the music played while Salome is doing her dance. And if you go into the far background there, you see the platter of St. John the Baptist. And there it is, truncated with that pier, which is just this brilliant move because he's been decapitated, right? And so you almost have the pier that's serving that function. And so he's kind of giving you several episodes of the story, not as a continuous narrative, but as an event that you have to go and discover. You have to really put your nose into that relief and look around, move your eye, and try to figure out what's going on. And the more you do this, the more you are rewarded, because there are infinite details, again, of architecture, of figures, of reaction, of human emotions. Everything is in this relief. And it's later that I think he might even arguably do an even better job of this sort of thing when we get to Padua. We'll wait to talk about those, but he's still thinking about how do I draw in the viewer, and make art somehow feel like a part of this new reality for the viewer. Just remarkable.
Can we just go back a second? Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So yes, we have this sort of the eye entering the scene, a bit like that. There's a scene in Blade Runner, isn't there, where Deckard is sort of going into the photo. That's what came to mind as you were talking about looking through the hole, chink in the wall and down at the table and so on, as François was giving us this kind of Dramamine moments, zooming in and out of the relief. And yes, and what you say also, of course, the narrative is compartmented. So you have a sequence, but you have this unified field in which it's all happening. And maybe this is the moment also to, to raise this issue that I think has been raised several times, including by myself, of course, that they're the relationship here between sculpture and not only painting, but also architecture, painting in terms of illusionism, because this isn't sculpture in the round, of course, only partially so in the foreground, and has been, as I say, it's been remarked several times, the illusion of depth is being conjured out of really millimeters of actual recession. And it's as though Donatello wants to extort the very last ounce out of it by getting you to glimpse through the wall as well. But there's also this relationship with architecture. Of course, he's designing architecture virtually. And after the kind of codification of perspective by Brunelleschi that you'll talk about in the book, this is also the way buildings were designed anyway. I mean, people generally see them in art history books as plans or axos or something like that, which are a much later graphic convention. But and they did draw plans for sure. But the way any real architectural designer will design is really to imagine a series of views. And with perspective, architecture becomes a kind of picture for the first time. So I just want to bring that up because I know these issues will come up again. And we see it really a lot more with, even more with the Padron reliefs, designing architecture that didn't exist. And, some of it wasn't until the 1930s, probably. So so if we could go on. Yes. Now you were very enamored of the Spiritelli in the book, and so maybe you could share your passion with us.
Sure. The idea of these youthful beings is something that obviously derives from classical art, and we often have had difficulty on what to call them, and lately the idea has been Spiritelli, which I think is most accurate, especially with how they're talking about them in the Renaissance. So Spiritelli would be like sprites, these ideas of that they're these kind of manifestations of feelings, of thoughts, of spirits, the spirit of dance. What causes me to smile right now? There's a spirit somewhere lurking in my being, right? That's causing some sort of glee, right? What causes you to dance or to sing? And what we have then is Donatello reviving the idea of these spirits, but really crucially is that they're not incidental. They're not just decorative appendages. They're always purposeful. They're always intentional. They're always adding something. On the Siena font, I didn't bring any of those details, but some of my absolute favorite figures are some of those figures from the font. They're the spirits of dance and celebration, because a child has been born and is being baptized into the Christian faith and is being given a name. It's just this wonderful feeling of celebration. And these two that you're looking at are supposed to be celebrations. We think that these were Donatello's additions to the Cantoria of Luca della Robbia in Florence Cathedral. And these are figures that have been sort of newly revived in recent years by Francesco Cagliotti as works by Donatello, and I think he's absolutely right. And in the exhibition, they rather shined for me. And they also bring up questions, though, which I think are really interesting. So we have these two Spiritelli, and they're meant to be seen as a pair, but they're not identical reproductions one of the other. They're sort of twins, but not identical twins. They're not even, absolute mirror images. There are these slight variations among them. And in the modeling of them, you can see a slightly different attention to the body. You can see slightly different faces. There's different detailing in the wings. And so, one asks a series of questions that I don't think have been answered yet. And that's sort of a wonderful thing, because as I like to tell my students, here we have 3 exhibitions on Donatello. At the end of it, not all the questions are going to be answered. There's going to be new questions caused by the exhibitions. And that's something for more people to do, for a new generation to figure out. And so one of the questions that those Spiritelli sort of caused me to ask is, they were made contemporaneously, but were they made in parallel or sequentially? In other words, does Donatello and maybe an assistant make one, finish and make another? Or are they working on both of them at the same time? And if so, to what extent are we seeing Donatello? To what extent are we seeing Donatello and Assistant A, Assistant B, et cetera? I don't want to go too deep into things that we really don't have a way of answering, but I think that we do need to be asking ourselves about the nature of Donatello's working method, about the way that he's using assistants, and about the way that he's collaborating. Because one of the things that was sort of became stronger and stronger as I was writing the book was that Donatello is never really a lone figure. He's always interacting with first Brunelleschi, then a whole bunch of sculptors and painters that include Paolo Uccello, that include Michelozzo, with whom he forms a partnership. He's certainly in conversation with Masaccio until Masaccio dies, with Filippo Lippi, and we have most of this documented, so we know that that's happening. And when he's casting, he's probably using the services of Michelozzo, and then when he goes to Padua, he's using the services of other people. Same is going to be true in Siena. When he comes back to Florence, which we'll get to later, I think he's also using surrogates of sorts. So Donatello is always working with others, always collaborating, always inventing, and yet there's this unbelievable sense of quality control, right? Where a Donatello sculpture in particular looks like a Donatello, has these hallmarks of Donatello, which allows us to say that those Spiritelli, yes, though they do differ one from the other, they can both be considered by Donatello. But for sure, there's more than just the hand of Donatello here. I find that fascinating. Again, it's a question of craftsmanship. It's a question of working method that I can't answer, but nobody can. Nobody has figured this out yet. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means that we're going to be continuing to investigate these aspects of Donatello.
Okay, then maybe we should move on.
Yeah.
All right, now David. Now this is one of the occasions in the book when you discuss this, that you take the opportunity to address the historiography of this sculpture, and in particular its perceived sexuality. So I wonder if you could share that appraisal with us now.
Sure, I'll do it rather briefly, because I think it's an aspect of Donatello that tends perhaps to overshadow other things. And in many ways, this is the inescapable image of Donatello, right? It's on the cover of my book. It's on the cover of many other books on Donatello. It's the arguably the most famous and most popular of works by Donatello. But it is unique. I mean, Donatello never repeats this again. except for the Spiritelli, right, and the crucifix that I showed, Donatello really doesn't do nude figures or adults or if you want to call the David, blossoming into manhood, and his figures are not all as provocative in a sexually suggestive way as this one. So there is something that I think is fairly unique going on here. In other words, I caution to say this is Donatello's ideal of maleness any more than I would say that the Mary Magdalene, which is one of my favorite sculptures of all time, is his single ideal of femininity. I think that he's saying something fairly unique in each work. Now, this one in particular, I think has usually been taken as somehow representing Donatello's own sexual proclivity, sexual ideas. That may or may not be true. I think that there's evidence to suggest that Donatello preferred same-sex relationships, and that's fine. That's our general understanding. And I do think that this is a sexy statue. There have been arguments made that, well, if you look at it from the right viewpoint, from far below, that somehow the sexuality goes away, right, or is diminished, or the provocative nature of it isn't as strong. I actually don't believe that. I think that it is intentionally made to be a provocative, sort of sexy, sexual figure. So why? What's he trying to express here? My general feeling about this is Donatello is faced with this kind of problem of representation. And ultimately what he wants to do is to answer this question, how do you show in a single static sculpture change, metamorphosis, growth, transition, right? How do you express something that is not fixed? And I think that he's right in answering that the best way to do that is in terms of human sexuality, which is not set and which is not fixed, and as we develop and as we reach puberty, et cetera, expresses itself differently, both physically as well as internally. And ultimately, that's what I think that this statue is Donatello saying that what we have are these analogies being made between David, the biblical hero, and the Medici as political guides, let's say, for the fortunes of Florence. Florence is becoming this republic guided by the Medici, and David, through the act of slaying Goliath, has transitioned, if you will, from boyhood to manhood. That there's this awakening of himself, which Donatello expresses in the form of the sexuality. And I think it is sexy. I think that the body is highly curvaceous. We only have this one view, but you can see from the breast, from the stomach area, from the buttocks. You can ask, why is he wearing that headdress, which is not anything that one would wear into battle? Why is the feather of Goliath going up the inner thigh of David? I think that that's to call our attention to the sexuality of this David, while at the same time the other leg is sort of stomping down on the right leg, excuse me, is stomping down on the other feather of Goliath. So I hope I've been clear here. It's a longer discussion I'm trying to boil down, but I think ultimately what he's trying to show is metamorphosis, is transition. He's doing it through the vehicle of human sexuality, but I think what he really means here, especially if it's going to be displayed in the Medici Palace for the people to see, that there's also a political dimension, that Florence is going from a boyhood to a manhood, and he's thinking about it in masculine terms. And that's ultimately what this statue is representing. I can't see denying the sexuality of the sculpture. I think it really is there.
Yeah, no, I also thought it was interesting in a way. You suggested in the book that we've come of age as an audience to look at the statue once again, you know, that you say our audience, today's audience, I've got the book here, increasingly understands beyond binary descriptions of gender and sexual preference in people as well as art. And you're actually talking about the combination of masculinity and femininity here, which seems more reasonable today than it did only a brief time ago. And then you go into a sort of, you know, quick, because you have to be quick, the description of mores in Florence in Donatello's own day. But anyway, we have to move on because time is slipping away.
But thank you for sharing that little excerpt, because, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about, especially in terms of the exhibit, is, you know, why now? You know, 2022, and the amazing amount of press and accolades that these exhibitions are receiving. I really do think that we are ready at this moment to think about Donatello a little bit differently. And there's no person in the Renaissance that I see as more eccentric and more idiosyncratic and some in ways that we embrace, because he's not a phony, right? Donatello doesn't put on airs. In fact, he's criticized for this, right? You know, a simple meal is as good as a feast, or he gives back robes that are given to him by Cosimo de' Medici. You know, he doesn't want to be pretentious, but he's also going to do things his own way. Yeah, I think we're more ready now to really understand Donatello than we've ever been.
And the sorry, we just quickly had the Prato Pulpit. We probably don't have time to really talk about it at too much length, but we should at least feast our eyes on this image.
Yeah, and I think speaking of Donatello's own way, I think we should speak a little bit of Schiacciato after this, because it is very much his own way of approaching the flat surface. But please go on the Prato Pulpit. I'm listening to.
Yeah, so we can be rather brief here. You know, I mentioned that there were a couple of moments in the show where my jaw just sort of dropped, and this was one of them as well. It's a capital for the Prato Pulpit, and while the pulpit itself I would put into that category of sort of trials and tribulations where really there isn't a satisfactory conclusion on the part of the Pratese officials or of Donatello and Michelozzo, who later offer to make good, and that offer is sort of rebuffed. Here, I think, is a moment where you see the brilliance of what might have been, or what the Pratese might have been expecting. This is one of the most beautiful moments to me of the exhibit. I can't put into words what I'm seeing here, but it's this endless display of decorative invention, from the human figures to the plants and architectural details. It shows an incredible array of diversity and inventiveness. And I think in many ways, it's Donatello and Michelozzo who I think has a hand in this, you know, sort of at their height of collaborative invention. It's beautiful, just so beautiful. And everywhere you look, there's another moment. You know, they didn't have to add that little puto or spiritello that you're panning over in the corner there. You know, that took time, that took effort. Why do that? Well, you know, doing so, you know, made for this more glorious whole.
Well, it's also an incredible display of literacy in ancient art, because I can definitely see Augustan there. I can see a bit of Hadrianic, the spiritelli on the floral fronds there. You know, I can see grotesques. I mean, this was one of the famous examples you'd have cited in Vitruvius and Horace, and something that's sort of somewhere between a capital, which it looks like with the top, and an altar relief of the type that he would have seen most easily in Rome, rather than anywhere else of this quality. But we're sorry, I just wanted everybody to enjoy it as much as we do, and then we should probably move immediately on to the reliefs.
Okay.
And it's worth saying, because time is short, that we have these famous rilievi stiacciati or schiacciati, but after we looked at some of these, there are also a couple of really interesting images that Victor put in of the Cellini Madonna and the Madonna Pio, which also come out of this tradition of Schiacciato and the implications, intermedial implications of Schiacciato that are worth looking at. But you take it away, Victor.
Sure. Let's back up a little bit to one of the reliefs. It almost doesn't matter which one, as long as there are a lot of details. This one is fine. And if you can zoom in just a little bit for us as I'm talking, Donatello really invents this new method of making sculpture, which we call Schiacciato, just crushed relief. And a point to keep in mind is when you're talking about something like perspective or something like Schiacciato, is it a trick or a tool, right? There are many painters who I think embrace this idea of I can show something in perspective and do something that's really boring because they look at it as a trick to bring your eye back into space. And then there are other artists such as Donatello, I think, who use perspective in order to, again, open up spaces that enhance the meaning of the work, that enhance the viewer's ability to enter into these new worlds that he's created. And Schiacciato then for Donatello is again a tool that he's using hand in hand with perspective. And the idea here is that if in painting, what you have is essentially a two-dimensional surface, and you're using your contrasts of colors and lines in order to make it look as though you're looking through a window into a new reality. Can he do the same thing or a similar thing? Let's call it an analogous thing in sculpture, because it's not the same, but it's analogous. And he says, yes, what I can do is carve in these shallow planes, and I can use perspective, and I can use foreshortening. I can use all of these other tools, not tricks, in order to make it really look as though we're in a heavenly place here. This relief is so remarkable for the way that those clouds seem to undulate, right? He's creating this heavenly universe. And out of these clouds, we have these angels, we'll call them angels now, with their wings, with their hair being swept back by the wind, with their bodies emerging forth from the clouds, and all kinds of really interesting contortions and permutations, right? And all of this to inspire and instill that sense of wonder. There you have the Virgin Mary, ascending or being assumed into heaven. His Madonnas always look a little melancholy. We can talk about that later if we want. But really, this relief is again another celebration of a spiritual truth for him. Wonderful detail right there in the center of a hand just emerging from the cloud, right? So again, forget about perspective, forget about Schiacciato. It's that moment, much like we saw in the Feast of Herod relief, where he wants you to see something that's a little bit strange, right? And to go ahead and enter into that world, and you realize, that strange little thing, that's the hand. And there's the angel whose hand it is, right? And what's that angel doing, right? Helping to sort of reveal. This is like, you can think of it almost like a curtain, right? In front of a stage set. They're revealing the Virgin Mary through these clouds. Absolutely remarkable. And in the one above it, I don't know if the details are quite as good, but he's using a little bit more of say traditional perspective. And there you can see trees on the left-hand side that sort of take your eye back to a background. I'm sorry that it's pixelating out. These angels that are embracing each other in the lower left. These moments of what seem to be very human interactions among these angels. Absolutely incredible, and really, to my mind, nobody before or since has ever equaled these Schiacciato reliefs.
It occurs to me as you say this, Victor, that in these ones, I mean, he's almost done away with perspective, hasn't he? I mean, apart from the diminution of trees in the first relief, these other Madonna reliefs that we just saw
Well, let's
we-
go to the Madonna of the Clouds, perhaps. That
Yeah.
might be the cleanest one to talk
So
about.
that's
This one,
that's
yes.
disappeared. And what we've got here isn't so much background as middle ground, because it's about cloud, and the ambiguity of cloud as something that's solid and has volume and so on, but you can put your finger through, which is what that hand is doing in the middle of the relief you showed us before. And it is like a curtain, because cloud's a veil as well, and it's the veil for God. And this is a revelation, isn't it, really? That's the Madonna in a mandala. It's just about visible that that's a mandala. So there's incredible kind of subtlety where the stone itself is dematerializing, becoming vapor, and all this sort of stuff. And it's very knowing, it's not accidental. So it's a step forwards or sideways from those ones which are constructed so you could walk all the way into the back of the space. Here you can't do that. You just know behind this there's this kind of infinite divine hinterland, somewhere at the end of it is God, and so on. But we have next to no time left.
Okay, let's skip to Padua then.
Yeah.
And I just wanted everyone to be able to see this. It's another instance where I've never seen these or this relief in such a way as you can see it in the exhibit. And I have a camera shot straight on and then a camera shot from below. And again, I think it shows that from below, the architecture really opens up and the space opens up, and Donatello is very intentional in what he's allowing us to see and what he's not allowing us to see. So we're not looking down on the floor, we're looking up into those arches. And at first, if you look at the architecture, at all those lines, it's a little bit confusing and it's a little bit off-putting. But the more you follow the lines, they're absolutely consistent. They absolutely make sense. He's creating this fictive architecture that is 100% plausible. And we were talking yesterday, Fabio and I, that there are some buildings in these reliefs where if you actually built that building today, you'd probably be celebrated as the most progressive, forward-thinking architect in town, whereas the ideas are 500 years old. Even something like what we see behind François in his background. Those buildings are absolutely remarkable, and I think if you were to build those, you'd be celebrated. So he gives us this fictive but very plausible architectural setting, and then within it we have this miracle of the mule, which is basically the mule choosing to venerate the host rather than going for its own food, and the amazement that it causes with these onlookers. It's sort of a cast of thousands, but each and every one is worth looking at. You could spend an hour just looking at the different faces, expressions, hands, bodies of these individuals. And again, you sort of marvel at the tenacity of Donatello. He doesn't have to put 6 of those figures in there. It would be just as successful, or would it, right? Does he know just where to stop? I think he does with these. These are the reliefs that I think Jansen calls mutations. There's just nothing like them, right? They seem aberrant in some way, and yet they're so very right. They're masterful.
I think we should begin opening the discussion to the audience, but I suggest that while, dear audience, you're preparing your question, Victor, you might like to say a little word on the Madonna Cellini, which is quite a remarkable.
Sure. Probably, the most remarkable, relatively recent discovery, let's say, of Donatello in the 70s. I think it surfaced. It had been known through documents that something like this existed, and here we have it. And I show you 3 views here. So for those who don't know, what you have is a relatively small object, this roundel. And on the left, is, let's call it the front, which is a relief of the Madonna and Child. But the back is actually a mold, such that if you pour something into it, in this case glass, what you get is an effect of reproduction of what you see in that front image. And so one of the points that I'd just like to make is Donatello is really thinking in terms of multimedia. And in fact, that's an area where I think that a lot of work really does need to be done. And I can give you more specifics in a bit. I think many of his works probably had a mixture of bronze and marble. We certainly see him using different types of stones and marble, using glass and terracotta, or in this case, bronze, using leather, perhaps, for a sling, all kinds of other materials he was using it. And here, I think he's really thinking in terms of what can we do with glass? And he's working in Padua. He's not far from Venice. He certainly would have visited Venice and known about the glass industry. And here then, making the glass object, and a point that we were talking about, Fabio, it might have been yours, is just, you know, this idea of these analogies that are made with the stained glass and the Virgin Mary, with light passing through the Virgin, through a window and not breaking it, as the Spirit of God passes through the Virgin Mary, but a virgin she remains, right? These ideas that are reflected in the glass. So again, with Donatello, it's never a trick. It's never just, can I make a mold out of a sculpture? It's, no, let's be intentional and purposeful about this. If I'm going to make a mold, it's going to be something that's worth it. And here, what's more worth it, right, than an image that looks like a window, right, of the Virgin Mary herself. If you want to scroll down to that Pio Madonna, you know, I think that's
we'll have to leave the audience to ask questions. But
kind of an underrated work, I think, by Donatello, where again he's using glass. But I'll stop and let the questions come.
Okay, well, if you want to ask questions to Victor or to Fabio, just use the raise hand function under, I think there's a button that says reaction at the bottom of your screen. So just wait for your hand to rise. I had a question for you earlier, Victor, in the meantime, but since we're on the Pio Madonna, which is really quite a spectacular work of multimedia that even includes wax, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, I think it's a kind of underrated work by Donatello. I can't imagine that anyone else would have come up with this. And if you want to pan over to the one on the right, that's another one where the viewpoint from below, I think, really enhances the image of the Madonna and Child, especially the Child. So what you have is, you know, I think Donatello is basically saying this. I've seen 1,000,001 Madonna and Child, and so have you. And couldn't they be really boring? And they can be. And here he's saying, I'm not going to let this be boring. I'm going to do something else. And here then he introduces a new background, which is, as I understand it, you have a kind of colored background, and then you have those wax images of seraph heads and vases, and then that's covered with glass. And so you would have had something shimmering. You would have had something that, again, evokes the idea of a window of light shining through. And you have a really interesting relation between Madonna and Child here. I think Donatello always is thinking, I cannot be stale. I cannot be boring. I have to introduce new ways to make each and every work seem new, original, unique, progressive. And he does that to me with this image.
Well, I'm waiting for a raised hand, but I'll take advantage of this to ask you another question. When I look at the Schiacciato of Donatello, I really think of James Turrell, because James Turrell, this modern artist, is someone who works with light. And when Donatello does this press relief, I have the impression not only he works with marble, but he works with shadows, and his material is both the marble and the shade at the same time. Would you both agree with this characterization?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think it comes through maybe just as well in the architecture, in that Donatello is not thinking of architecture as just a bunch of masses that are kind of put together like Legos, even though they happen to be my favorite toys, right? He's really thinking about architecture in terms of spaces, in terms of decorations, in terms of how they create environments. So he's thinking very broadly, and so his mind, I think, would naturally also think very broadly in terms of using Schiacciato and other techniques. Again, they're never tricks with him, right? With some artists, they really are. You know, you look at some of Masolino's works with perspective, and it's just a little trick that he doesn't quite master. With Donatello, no, it's a tool that he pulls out of the toolkit and then runs with it.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question from Bennett Harrison. If you can unmute yourself, and yes.
Yeah. Hi, Victor. Nice to see you. I was curious about, I sort of have this question about the Cellini Madonna, because you mentioned that perhaps research can go in the direction of Donatello's engagement with multimedia. And I was wondering if you see any connection to the handful of like wafering irons that survive from this period, which in general, you know, there's one in the V&A that I think dates to like the 1480s. So these are later, but I've held in the back of my mind when I think about this object, the possibility of, I mean, yes, glass, definitely, but perhaps also some kind of baking, and the possibility that Donatello is, I don't know, somehow the Cellini Madonna seems to evoke a kind of decorative arts or domestic arts in a way that we might not often associate with the bulk of his production, and particularly in bronze. But just if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, good for you. You've asked a question that I've never really thought about, and perhaps should. So I thank you for that. I can't say that I can give you a profound answer to it. But you do have a number of things that are coming together here. I think the small size, the round shape, and the use of bronze. And it's not just bronze, but it's been gilded and it's been decorated in quite interesting ways. I think he's using this sort of pseudo-Kufic or sort of pseudo-Arabic script on it. He's using motifs that have often reminded scholars of things in the Byzantine world or classical world or contemporary. So I think that there's a lot going on here. And there's a really beautiful essay by Amy Block on the nature of glass and light, the way that light would affect this. So I think that all of that is operative. And I thank you for throwing into that kitchen sink ensemble, other objects that might have been more associated with the home and domesticity, which is probably appropriate.
Thank you. Eckhart, you raised hand. There was a question in the chat before, so I'll pass the question in the chat and then it will be your turn. The question in the chat is from Alison's iPad, and it says, what factor influenced the amount of output of works? Was it his sheer stamina? Was it the number of clients available? You have indicated that he was not really interested in money.
Probably all of the above. Donatello does hit stages in his career where he absolutely can't satisfy all of the clients that are vying for his services. And these are clients that are from all over. And to a certain extent, I think that Donatello is playing one patron off against another, offering maybe temptations of here's what I could do for you, here's what I could do for you, maybe as a way of gaining a little bit of leverage in making his works. It's going to be a constant problem throughout his career, though, is starting works and then having to come back to them, having more commissions than he can possibly satisfy. Yeah, he's super ambitious. And I think he wants to take on all of these projects. I think that he's sincere in wanting to satisfy all of these patrons. The crush of works, I think, is just probably too much for him. And in some ways, that's the way it worked in the Renaissance. I mean, you see that in Michelangelo as well. his ambition and his intentions far outstrip his waking hours in the day to actually satisfy what he'd like to do.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from Eckhart Marchand.
Yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful talk, and thank you particularly for guiding us with your wonderful ability to look at these works. I found a number of your readings extremely illuminating. I was wondering, and I hope I'm not repeating François' first question, which I missed. The richness of different materials that Donatello uses and which he also drew out. How would you explain that? Is that just in the nature of the various objects, various tasks that he was engaging with, or why would he work in so many different materials, much more than any other artist of his time?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question, because it's a question that I'm asking myself currently. I really think that we are missing a lot of the multimedia creations of Donatello. So this is good to have here. So in the upper left, you see the St. George, which is a very early work of Donatello. I think most scholars posit that he had some sort of a helmet in bronze and some sort of an object in the right hand, whether it was a sword or a baton, or lance. Who knows? But we have the marble David. If you want to just scroll down a couple of slides to any of the marble Davids, clearly there's a piece missing there. Yeah, but go up so we can see the whole figure.
Sorry. That's the one.
Yeah. So there you have a pocket of a sling with a rock in it, and then nothing, right? And you have two hands, and there's some debate over which hand held whatever connects to that sling. I'm not sure what the controversy is. It seems pretty clear that it would be the right hand, and that's the only appropriate hand to use if you're going to knock out Goliath. And so what connected from that hand to the pocket, and it was probably leather, or maybe it was rope, or something. But again, I really believe that even if we never know what that material is, it's more proof that Donatello is thinking in terms of incorporating other media. If you want to scroll down, you showed very, very briefly that curious sculpture of Attis. We don't even know what to call it, but he has that really strange hand position of both right and left hand. It's just before the bronze David. Right. So, there's been an argument made recently that he was holding nothing in his hands, based on the fact that there's no evidence from recent conservation. But I say, of course, right? Whatever he was holding probably wasn't bronze, which would have left a mark, or metal, which left a mark. It was probably something soft, which wouldn't have left a mark. But I can't see that hand position there is natural in any way, right? And whether he's holding a bow and arrow, or whether he's holding a whirligig, or whether he's holding something else, I do think that there was something there, and that Donatello had put that in a different medium. And then we have the Madonna Pio, and we have the Cellini Madonna, if you want to include that. We have the stonework in the Cantoria. We have the stonework in Padua, in that wonderful entombment, which I don't have a slide of here. But time after time, I think we see Donatello is basically saying, what do I need to get the job done, right, in this really inventive, creative way? And that's a sign also of great artists working today. They say, well, even though I've never worked in this other medium before, that's the solution medium, and we're going to go there, or we're going to combine media. So I think it's in his DNA, it's in his creative way of being, that if it means he has to add something in another medium to his bronze or his marble or whatever it is, he's not afraid to do that. In fact, I think he's very willing to do that. And I don't know if I'm the one to do it, but somebody's got to write a study on Donatello and multimedia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, on this subject, there's a question in the chat from Beth Holman. Hello. Wonderful presentation. Do you think that the combination of media may be influenced by his goldsmith's training? Goldsmiths' works often combine media and are combined with other media. And indeed, goldsmiths are very much leader in the Renaissance artistic world. So what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. It's something that I didn't mention, but we need to be thinking about, especially the story, which I do think is true, that Donatello and Brunelleschi are spending all this time in Rome, and they're doing kind of odd jobs, we'd call it today, in order to finance their Rome journey. And so if they're doing goldsmiths work, I think that probably is including things like jewelry and rings and small objects that might include silver and gold and what have you. I think both Brunelleschi and Donatello are thinking very broadly about materiality, and that's proven, of course, when they're asked to do these strange figures for the spurs of the Duomo, which is going to be in some sort of a gilt lead, right? Donatello and Brunelleschi both, especially at that early stage of their careers, are thinking, I hate to use cliches, but they're thinking outside the box. They're thinking, like, how else can we do this? And I think that that's in the nature of goldsmith work, right? Where you're presented with an object, let's say it's a stone, and your patron wants it mounted on something, whether it's a ring or something else, and you have to figure out, how am I going to marry disparate media and come up with an object that celebrates the main object under consideration, the diamond or whatever it is, right? But also is an artwork in and of itself. So yeah, I think goldsmith's work lends itself to that.
I don't see any other questions, so it might be the time to thank you very warmly, Victor and Fabio, for your contribution, for showing us Donatello, and for some really great quality time. So thank you to the audience, and we'll be back on the 17th of November with Machiavelli. So thanks again, and good evening, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.